Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kim Marie, and I'm with the Evolutionary Astrology Network. And today we are going to look at Donald Trump's chart and his 2020 forecast. Before we get started with that, though, first of all, let's just take a look at those dates that we have, the Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto conjunctions. I call them the stellium all together right now. And so in addition to that, the 5 conjunctions on your screen, in addition to that, you can see the dates and degrees that all 3 of these planets go retrograde and direct. And so what I want to just briefly point out is that the Jupiter retrograde cycle is contained within the Saturn retrograde cycle. And both of those retrograde cycles are contained within the Pluto retrograde cycle. So it's going to be an unfolding this year for all of us from those deepest soul levels, Pluto, into what's conscious, how do we look into what's unconscious, Saturn, and then Jupiter bringing it all to the surface, trying to help us make sense of it. As you can see on your screen as well, they're all going to turn retrograde and direct fairly close to each other, the month of May and the month of September, just by nature of their turning directions out there in the geocentric sky. Those 2 months, May and September, can bring up heightened activity, heightened awareness, throwing off the old with the retrograde. What are we going to accept or move forward with the new when they turn direct? I also want to just briefly say, in general, for the year 2020, for all of us, we can all expect a wild ride. Any of you who've been paying attention to these first 2 months of Jupiter in Capricorn can recognize that, Jupiter's growth and expansion. And so everything we've been observing with Saturn in Capricorn for 2 years, with Pluto in Capricorn for almost a dozen years now, Jupiter's going to make it into an apex and put it out there so loud that we can't miss it. And it will do this from both inclusive and exclusive perspectives. Another way to say this is, I have on your screen here, this year, 2020, we can expect some of the last gasps, as I'm choosing to call it, of all of the patriarchal distortions that many of us in the world of EA are familiar with. And also that consensus society, those approximately 7 out of 10 souls all over the planet that want to control everything from an outer perspective, and the rest of us are meant to follow along. We can probably all just reflect on whatever country we live in today and recognize that there has been a surge of conservative principles or exclusionary principles, no matter what country or continent we happen to reside on. I probably say a couple times a week, I can't wait for Saturn to get into Aquarius April, May, and June. I can't wait for Jupiter and Saturn to get into Aquarius in 2021. So just know that even though it's going to just appear to be outrageously wild, there's still hope, and we're still going to move forward. We're making what does not work so conscious that everyone will recognize it. Now, just one little brief slide on what I call the Capricorn compressions. Within that, the concept of depression and the concept of involution, they're a very natural part of the Capricorn archetype and Capricorn evolution. And they will come about for each of us individually. They'll come about for us as collective groups when those outer realities and circumstances just no longer serve our soul, or they just don't work on planet Earth. And what that does when we're turned inward, This is that passive polarity of the Capricorn archetype. It enforces emotional reflection, or the Cancer polarity, to become aware of the inner dynamics and motivations that each of us have on personal levels, that as groups we have on collective levels. And it asks us to honor then that inner question of, why is this happening? Why am I bummed out? Why am I feeling like I can't make a difference? It will make us aware of the changes to make in our world personally and collectively, so that we can be part of the cardinal polarity changes that the Capricorn archetype still brings along. Now, in the midst of all that, though, it requires us to always keep putting one foot in front of another. The cardinal modality of Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, one foot in front of the other, until we really see the changes in our life and showing up on planet Earth. So remember these little details as we go through the next hour here. Also remember, it's not all going to be bad news. We've had Pluto in Capricorn for a dozen years now. If you reflect on your own personal life, any prior efforts you've had to be in touch with what's real with your world, any inner reflections and changings within yourself, it can create multiple opportunities over 2020 for soul growth, for familial healings, for resource stability, even expansion, career advancements, and putting your new realities out there on planet Earth. Saturn is now new phase Pluto in Capricorn. So we're already in midst of creating these new beginnings, even if they're not outwardly expressing themselves to the degree that we notice it individually and collectively. So as we now move forward and look at specifically Donald Trump's chart here, one more time, keep what I've just said in mind. There's going to be the changing of the guard, with the old passing by and the new coming, and we just may not see all the expressions of it right away. So here is Donald Trump's chart, June 14th, 1946, 10:54 a.m., Queens, New York. Just in case you've had your head in the sand for the last few years, Donald Trump is currently the president of the United States. And if you're not familiar with this, the United States has a presidential election once every 4 years, and any individual can run for 2 consecutive terms, and then they are term limited. They cannot run for office again. If you are somewhat familiar with Donald Trump's chart, most people are very attracted to this polarity in Gemini and Sag. Donald Trump was born on a lunar eclipse. Anytime we have eclipses, whether they are solar eclipses or lunar eclipses, no matter what signs they are in, they activate his chart. Those of you who follow the eclipse seasons, you know that twice a year, everything gets emotionally emphasized. It's brought to the surface to hopefully be understood and addressed, and we move forward with our emotional growth in some way. I feel that Donald Trump, in EA's terminology, is the epitome of what we will call third house consensus. We know how the system works. We can work within the system. We also know how to game the system, which he has a long record of doing. In his life, between him and his business and his family's charity, which they were forced to shut down for abuse reasons, he has been involved in over 4,000 lawsuits. Gemini Sag, the polarity with lawsuits. He's been the litigator in most of them. Most people who file lawsuits against him are doing so because he would not keep up his end of a bargain, or they were due to be paid for services rendered that they did not, they weren't paid. Trump is famous for reneging on any deals and trying to always catch a better deal, a better deal, a better deal, especially with any contractors he may own. Donald Trump is a 12th house Pluto. And in the world of evolutionary astrology, 12th house Pisces, Pluto's soul, he's a Pisces soul. And I have a tendency to call Pisces souls, or even people with a lot of planets in Pisces or the 12th house, they will be the actors of the zodiac. And the reason for this is all 11 houses are contained within the last archetype. And so you really have to have an observed correlation with Neptune, Pisces, and 12th house, because it can go almost anywhere. It's trying to hold the whole circle of the entire chart. Relative to observe correlate with a third consensus soul, all you have to do is look out there at the news. Donald Trump as a Pisces soul is all over the place. If he says it, it's gospel. It doesn't matter whether it's the truth or not. You will sometimes find with that Gemini Sag polarity that they are the salesmen of the zodiac, and they get so good at telling their own stories they believe it. Well, so does a 12th house Pluto. Pisces souls, and again, if there are any sensitive Pisces souls, and I have a lot of them in my family. If you're a sensitive Pisces soul, please remember one size does not fit all. I'm talking about one specific soul here right now, all right? But for Donald Trump as a Pisces soul, is he's like the ultimate tap dancer. He will pull whatever out of his head and say whatever, and 2 minutes later say the opposite thing and think nothing of it. What that will help us understand with a Pisces soul, in his case, is that he really doesn't have much of a moral compass. One of the long-term lessons of 12th house Plutos is the dissolving of whatever is their next step of growth in regards to deeper values and meanings, in regards to a religious and or spiritual path. For those of you who have not caught the news in the last couple of days, Trump was his family were long term Democrats. He switched parties back and forth for several years and then went over to the Republican Party when he started the birther movement of Barack Obama saying he wasn't born in the United States. Donald Trump in the last few days has basically stated at the National U.S. Prayer Breakfast before his State of the Union address, which he did yesterday for us, is that he really doesn't believe people who say they pray. He really doesn't put much stock in people praying for him. I may not be paraphrasing it quite correctly. Go Google this if you want. But he was specifically picking apart Nancy Pelosi, who says many, many times she's a devout Catholic, that she prays for his soul. All right, I'm back. I'm persistent. I have an 8th house Pluto. I was speaking to the fact that with Donald Trump having a 12th house Pluto, Pisces Soul, and at the National Prayer Breakfast, which happens for him once a year before our State of the Union address in the United States, Trump was making some very disparaging comments about people who pray. And he was speaking specifically about Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who is a very devout Catholic, says that she prays for his soul quite often. He was also lambasting Senator Mitt Romney, who was the only Republican senator who voted to remove him from office a couple days ago with his impeachment trial, saying that he had to follow his conscience. And Mitt Romney is also known as being a very religious person from the Mormon faith. And so my point was Donald Trump, with his third stage consensus awareness in his soul, and being a 12th house Pluto, he pretends to be religious. He pretends to have a moral compass. But if you have any sense of ethics and faith and morality within your own soul, you can observe and correlate that this is someone who does not follow through his action. He doesn't walk the talk. The actions don't match the words. And so it is his Pisces soul that is as much a collective lesson for all of us here on planet Earth as it is with this Gemini Sag polarity, the lunar eclipse that he was born on. So because of our little time here, let me move on and move us forward. You're going to get a rhythm to what I'm going to show you here with all of these charts. I'm going to give you dates and degrees and aspects, and then we're going to look at a chart. And then we're going to dates and degrees and aspects, then we're going to look at the chart. And so here is Donald Trump's chart with on the inner circle with a bi-wheel for the North Node lunar eclipse. Now, what I want to point out to you is that all 5 of the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, are all very, very active in his chart this year. So are the Venus and Mars retrograde cycles. And I repeat myself, Donald Trump was born on a lunar eclipse. So every time there's an eclipse, doesn't matter where it is, what signs or houses, it affects him. And all of the 6 eclipses in 2020 are very dynamic in his chart. We're not going to look at all 6 of them for time-wise, but I do have the North Node lunar eclipse drawn up here for June 5th of this year. And as we can see, that sun, moon, full moon lunar eclipse is smack dab on that Gemini Sag stellium. One of the things that I'm wondering about, and this is also going to be true with this transiting nodal axis moving into Gemini Sag, is will all of the many lawsuits out there start to catch up with him? In the United States, you cannot take gifts from foreign entities. And if you do, we call it the emoluments clause here. And I want to say there's some nonprofit group documenting it, and they've either, I want to say they have something like 2,000 examples of him violating this, and several of these examples are working their way through our state court systems and our federal court system. So I expect to see a fair amount of lawsuits out there in the news for him. The impeachment gathered a lot of attention, but it's nowhere near the end. And the Democratic Party are going to continue to search for documents, see if they can subpoena John Bolton and others within his administration to still testify. I think that Trump's going to be emboldened, and he's going to do even more outrageous things. If you paid any attention to the news cycle today, he is swearing on TV. He is very, very disparaging of anybody who disagrees with him on anything in the most minute level to, factual, reality. The biggest question will be for especially those of us who live in the United States. I think the rest of the world's a little more saner, perhaps, than those of us in the US. Will the public start to just get tired of him? And I think this might be one of the most hopeful examples of Donald Trump not being reelected. I will show you charts. When I first started doing all this research for the year of 2020, I went through my own Capricorn depression because on election day, he is going to be within minutes of the transiting nodal axis being exact on his natal nodal axis, a nodal axis return. I'll show you that as we move along. But first of all, let's just briefly look at this fact that the North Node is going to transit into Gemini while that South Node moves into Sagittarius. You see the dates, May 5th, 2020 through January 18th of 2022. This is going to be an emotional review of truth versus lies, facts versus opinions. Gemini can tell the truth or lie. Sag can tell the truth or lie. Don't make it, limited to the signs, okay? Now, the intent here is for our personal truth to expand into what EA calls universal or timeless natural truth, natural law, we shorten it up into. And then from that, being able to understand there's many paths to the truth. We're all going to have our own path. From that, can we accept everybody on their own path to truth? Can we accept unity in diversity? Now, Donald Trump is entitled to his path to the truth, but when you have 150 million people in your country saying you're not telling the truth, there's something to be said in really checking that out. So the news media will be part of this story here in 2020. As we move through the re-election campaign of president here in our United States. There's no guarantee that we're going to naturally evolve because, as you will see when I show you the US chart, we have always had strong opposition within this country between inclusive and exclusive principles. Now, the distortions with Gemini Sag, it's going to increase the misinformation campaigns through social media and corporate news. The eclipses will emphasize all of that. Will there be a fulcrum of pressure, for instance, on Facebook saying you have to fact check your ads? You can't just go free speech and, allow Donald Trump to tell us cows have purple polka dots. The themes, as you see in the bottom of your screen, again, going to involve a lot of lawsuits, laws changing. That stuff's going to be in the news a lot for this country. News and media, education, mass migrations aren't going to stop. Immigration issues are going to keep going. So will increasing awareness of climate change. I really do feel that 2019 was a fulcrum point for the climate change shift in awareness. I think it will pick up speed this year. We will continue to see various types of religious and dogmas fall out because the younger souls coming on to planet Earth, these Pluto and Sag, for instance, they've got a real good BS meter in being able to call these types of things out. So here's going to be a strong theme in 2020 for all of us, this nodal axis shift, in addition to it being very active in Donald Trump's chart. So let's just jump into the fact that we're going to have a Venus retrograde in Gemini, and here's how active it is in Donald Trump's chart. You see the degrees on your screen. May 12th through June 24th, 22 to 5 degrees Gemini. When you see these aspects transiting Venus to Donald Trump's natal chart, when you see him in blue, they are what we call the ease aspects, trines and sextiles. If you see him in red, they're the hard aspects, conjunctions, oppositions, and squares. And so here's Venus in Gemini at the top of Trump's chart on Uranus North Node and his Sun, and then opposing his Moon South Node. But we also have Venus making these nice trines and sextiles. Let's get a visual on this. Here you will see, and here's the other interesting thing. I looked at Venus, Mars, and the 5 outer planets, and between turning retrograde and direct, every single one of them was having a strong impact on Donald Trump's chart when they changed directions. This example, Venus turning retrograde, literally minutes away from his North Node in Sun, probably exactly on that North Node Sun midpoint. And so Venus's values, and when Venus goes retrograde, we have to throw off old value systems. We have to throw off old relating patterns. Inner relationship with ourself, ruling Taurus, outer relationship with others, ruling Libra. And so this particular Venus retrograde, with that North Node moving into Gemini, marching closer toward Venus during its 6 weeks of retrograde, will it be one of those time periods where some of the public starts saying, how can you not recognize these lies? How can you sell your morality to just get your way, which is basically what our Republican Party did in voting to not impeach him in our U.S. Senate, when the facts that were released were showing that he was using his office for personal gain in the upcoming election. I expect Donald Trump to say all kinds of outrageous things. I expect him to do all kinds of outrageous actions. If you feel so inclined to donate to nonprofits that work with a lot of these legal issues, for instance, in the United States, the American Civil Liberties Union has been taking on a lot of these lawsuits with the various states in our country to say you're violating the Constitution, this is outright illegal, this is various types of discrimination, whether by race or gender, etc. Trump is not going to back off. Will Venus retrograde say, I don't know if I can vote for this guy? I think there's just going to be, I hope and I pray, there's going to be a groundswell that recognizes this and wants to do something about it. The Venus trines to the Mercury, Chiron, Jupiter that we see here, this is going to also somewhat enable his line. In the natal chart, these trines between Gemini and Libra, he literally believes that if he says it, it's true. That 12th house Pluto can be so out of touch with what's real. I don't know when he's going to crash, but when he does, it's going to be pretty tough. The Venus retrograde is going to play into Neptune. I'll speak to this later. Making squares to the Gemini-Sag polarity for the next 4 years, 2019 to 2022. Here's what transiting Jupiter is going to do with Donald Trump's chart. You can see here that Jupiter is going to make 3 oppositions to both his natal Saturn and his natal Venus. And he can come up with an extreme, Jupiter's extremes of words and actions, Saturn. And of course, there are those who are just going to follow him with blind faith. I really ask the universe on a collective level, if you're at a national prayer breakfast that is full of all of these servants of God from these various faiths, and Donald Trump is saying to you, I don't believe in prayer. I don't believe in people who pray for me. Does that not take you back some? Are you going to again sell your soul so that you can stop abortion happening in the United States, or stop people of a different color coming in to the United States? Here is a visual of the stellium planets as we look at them opposing his natal Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer, the 11th house. When Jupiter finishes up its retrograde cycle in September, it is literally going to turn stationary direct right here within 3 minutes of a first quarter square to natal Jupiter. This will be the intensifying of the polarization that we see going on in this country between those who support Donald Trump and those who do not. That part of it with Jupiter is going to, magnify the words and actions, as I'm going to sound like a repeating drum. The question will soon become, what check will Saturn and Pluto put on him? Just a moment for you with this Venus, Saturn, and we can even bring Mercury in, those 3 planets in Cancer, 11th house there. Donald Trump plays the victim card all the time. He's the victim of a witch hunt. He's the victim of the Democratic Party just out to get him and lying all over the place to do it. He is a victim of anybody who doesn't like him. That's where this is coming from. And this is also that part of the chart where, Saturn in Cancer. And again, this is one individual. Do not get triggered with your own chart, please. Saturn in Cancer will, in consensus especially, they'll circle the wagons, as we say out here in the northern plains, to protect themselves from the Wild West. And he does that. He circles in and he allows no deviation. His family, why do you think his children act the way they do? They have learned this. The Republican Party has learned this. And so Jupiter will emphasize it as it makes oppositions to these 2 this year. And then again, as it squares his natal Jupiter, you're with them or you're not. And that's going to become more and more extreme. So far, 3 years in, all of the progressive medias, they have various theories on why his faithful followers just will not leave him. The biggest theory that I've heard that I kind of agree with is he has a parasocial relationship. They've put him on the pedestal and they don't care what he says. A lot of his followers followed him over his 14, 15 years of The Apprentice, and they loved his outrageousness. He is reality TV embodied in the White House. And so they're just digging in and they are with him no matter what. These people will be motivated to vote. It will be up to the rest of us to motivate everyone else to vote. For those of you who are not aware of this, in the United States, once every 10 years, we have a census count, and it has been going on, oh gosh, I think 150 years or something like that. And we used to do it with pen and pencil and through the mail, still do it that way to some degree, but we're trying to electronicize it. The history of that is we've never asked someone if they were a US citizen because we are a land of immigrants. But what they would do is they wanted to get the most accurate count of how many people, regardless, lived in each of the 50 states, because our federal monies are released via grants in various ways, determined by how many people are in each state. And so you always want an accurate count. You want to be able to get as much federal grant money as possible. It's also turned into, in our Senate, each of the 50 states get 2 senators, but the House of Representatives, 435 people, they are decided by your state population. So again, you would want the most accurate count possible. There is a conservative movement to scare any illegal immigrant or anybody who has no documentation into not being counted. It means that your larger progressive cities will lose votes and your small rural areas will gain votes. This is another big issue that's going to be going on with our local, state, and federal races this year. This is another political issue that's going on. And this is why you will hear Donald Trump, as well as many in the Republican Party, continue to make immigration the boogeyman. And so the question is going to come up because Jupiter is expansion. And if you know, one potato chip's good, the whole bag's better. Saturn acts as the contraction. That's their 20-year cycle together. And Pluto acts as a big, big reality check on a soul level. And so the question becomes, with Saturn and Pluto here, what will they do as they make their oppositions to this Venus Saturn in Donald Trump's chart? You can see here on your screen, Saturn has 1 opposition to itself. It has 3 oppositions to Venus. Pluto will make 3 oppositions to Saturn this year, 3 oppositions to Venus next year. Together, what they are going to bring about is Donald Trump having to face the boundaries of what he can and cannot control and manipulate. These are the 2 great taskmasters in the zodiac. We are really determined to get this information out today, okay? I was basically saying that as Saturn retrograde slows down and gets ready to go stationary direct, it is going to be squatting exactly opposite his natal Venus. And Venus in Cancer can be so sensitive. Many times they feel everything. Relative to 3rd stage consensus and Donald Trump being a 12th house Pluto, he can't feel anything beyond the tip of his nose. He's a Pluto in Leo. It's all about him. And so whatever contractions or reality checks may be going on for Trump with Saturn and Pluto opposing Venus, Saturn natally, he can't 11th house detach and observe it. He can't recognize it. He is the, you know, he plays the most wounded little puppy there is on planet Earth. And he's well known for being vindictive. He's been full of it in the news today. And so, you know, there's a person in one of our progressive late night talk shows, Bill Maher, if you know who he is. He is on record as saying if Trump loses, he will not leave office. And he says it and he says it and he says it. And he's been right on a few things over the last 3 years. This is the type of thing that with Saturn and Pluto opposing these Cancer planets for him, you know, he's going to continue to just cry wolf and, you know, call out the masses. He's on record today saying that those who brought the impeachment against him, what was the term he used? Maybe have some punishment coming towards them, inviting, you know, his followers to go out and maybe be nasty. And so this is what we're looking at here with this Cancer Capricorn axis, specifically with his chart. And, you know, again, there's various other aspects going on. Venus will be on his Mars. Transiting Sun will be on his Neptune. You could just start to dissect these charts to pieces if you want. Come back and watch this EA Zoom meeting again as something goes on, and you can review this for yourself in your own studies. The point is, Saturn and Pluto will be trying to give him a reality check. We are all going to have to wait and see and observe just exactly what the circumstances will turn out to be in regards to this. Will we have to have an extreme mass shooting again in the United States? Will we have to have one of our Democratic Party senators or representatives hurt for people to recognize the impact of his words and actions? Stay tuned. We'll see. On a practical level, I would just hope that his tax returns are finally turned over. I would hope that the emoluments clause is starting to come out and we see the abuse of office. But, you know, so far that's had no reality check whatsoever. With Pluto in Capricorn and Jupiter there, how extreme will it get? Will it make any difference? Stay tuned. Here's Uranus. Uranus is going to make last quarter squares to his Pluto. And with this, Trump is going to be extremely frustrated over any perception of losing control. Uranus is a last quarter square to his natal Pluto. And that is the crises in consciousness. And it will also be serving to create the upsets and to show a 12th house Pluto, you are not in charge, Source is in charge. And he's not going to like anything around that type of energy. And so he could be quite impulsive with his actions and words again. Transiting Uranus has been in his 9th house for a few years. He literally does believe that he's above the law and that he's the chosen one. We'll add Neptune into this picture and you'll see those that just, you know, some of our right-wing ministers in this country coming out and literally telling their flocks, he is the chosen one. Will he explode in some way? Leo rules the heart, Aquarius rules the brain. Leo, Aquarius rule heart attacks and strokes. Will he have a health issue, especially if there's any perception on his part? For instance, re-election polling that may show him losing or dropping in his poll numbers. He'll start going more frantic and more outrageous. Will it create any type of earth event? Or as my husband likes to say, presidents in re-election campaigns here love to go to war to get reelected, because so far in our country's history, if our country's been at war, the president leading us always gets reelected. That's why I put energize world peace on this screen. Let's look at Uranus now. Here's Uranus turning stationary retrograde at 10 degrees, 41, 42 minutes Taurus. Last quarter square his Pluto at 10:02 Leo. One more time. You can see that looking at this visually, he can believe he's above the law. Will the law start to catch up with him? Will there start to be Taurian limitations? I have a tendency to say collectively that Uranus in Taurus from time to time is going to pull the rug out from underneath all of us with security, and it turns us inward to create deeper inner security. How will that happen for Donald Trump? Will there be lawsuits? Will he have to pay out more resources? Uranus in Taurus, the rule of thumb, or most of the news articles and facts that are coming out, is we're starting to realize the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent on security detail for him traveling to all of his personal golf courses. Barack Obama in 8 years of presidency only went to a public golf course twice. I think I may not have exactly twice, let's say 10, compared to spending 95% of his time on military golf courses, which already had the security right there. Trump is the opposite. He goes to all his personal golf courses. Will those facts start to come out? Trump's in lawsuits trying not to let U.S. citizens know how much money we are spending on security detail for him and his family. His golf courses are a lot of his businesses are seeing decreases in money because so much of the liberal elite don't go there. And so we may see some of those types of facts start to come out with the Uranus last quarter squares to Pluto. And of course, anything that doesn't show him being the biggest, baddest one out there, king of the hill, will, drive him bananas and have him saying outrageous things, lying, doing whatever to draw attention to another direction. Here is Neptune. Neptune is very active on that Gemini-Sag polarity. You can see on your screen here, Neptune had the last quarter squares to Uranus. We are just approaching the third one. This year, Neptune is starting the squares to his nodal axis, and I'm going to show you the next screen, okay, as well. Here's Neptune through 21 and 22. Neptune will make 5 squares to his nodal axis. And with the nodes moving into Gemini Sag, Neptune will have its time period to square the nodes. It will be within orbs of having all of this active on Trump's chart. He will have the first quarter squares to the moon. He'll have the last quarter squares to the sun. Neptune is in Trump's 7th house here. And so this also is, his relationships and his relationships with the public and those that blindly follow him and see him as that chosen one. But it also can have the rest of the world looking on and going, what is wrong with that country? Stay tuned. We have transiting Pluto will so make our natal Pluto. We're going to find out over the next few years. But Neptune, in its own sign, Pisces, it's finishing up a 165-year cycle of the evolution of belief systems. It is why there has been such a, especially here in the United States, there's been a dramatic decline in people who go to church or synagogues or mosques on a real regular basis. And especially from the Christian perspective. And it has caused, there's a crisis going on with a lot of our churches here in the US right now because of the empty pews, which means no money. And as part of this broader cycle with Neptune and Pisces of collective, and especially again, these younger generations recognizing, I don't necessarily need the building. I don't know if I need that intermediary. Isn't it a 24/7 inside job? And can I figure this out logically on my own, Virgo polarity? And so Neptune's having this slow impact on collective belief systems, on personal belief systems worldwide. And as we see, Neptune's into the middle of its transit through Pisces. So we're just really starting to get into the thick of it, including, oh, this is too much to take in. I just have to check out. I'm not going to pay any attention to politics in my country. I'm not going to pay any attention to these, ridiculous people who think they're, in charge and running it. So personally for Trump, this will have an effect. If he's reelected, I think he will be impeached again. If he's not reelected, this guy could, go off the deep end. The thought is that he ran for the presidency because he didn't think he would win, and he was going to parlay that into his own TV network station like Oprah did, so he could control all of his reality TV. Does he do something like that if he's not reelected? I really do feel that slowly but surely, Neptune's going to cause disillusionment with the masses. Disillusionment with leaders from different countries going, we're not going to invite you to play with us anymore. The Neptune transits are another signature of just how blindly he's behaving to the risks of climate change. The things that he does left and right in this country are very depressing, gutting all of our various environmental laws, reducing our national parks, making it easier and easier to drill for fossil fuels offshore, which we've had bans on for long periods of time. Those are all of the effects to the sustainability of life on planet Earth are specifically part of this aspect with Neptune. Now, I did not put Chiron in. I have a tendency to include Chiron as a planet these days. I didn't put it in here basically just for my own time limits. But if we look at Neptune, it has went back and forth over, or excuse me, transiting Chiron in Aries. It has went back and forth opposing his natal Neptune. And when Chiron in Aries is wounded, it fights. It comes out very defensively. And it will defend the past with consensus. And so Chiron in Aries for him in that 8th house, he's grabbing the power, and you're with me or you're not. And he is putting himself out there. Aries will sometimes do that superhuman, I'm first, I'm best, I've got it, it'll play God. And that's the woundedness to Chiron in Aries, and it's activating his natal Neptune as well. Almost everything we look at in his chart, he thinks he can do no wrong. He thinks he is the chosen one. I hope, I energize that this Neptune transit over this Gemini-Sag polarity in his chart slowly but surely erodes all this away and takes him off the deep end. That fall from grace that we can have in the world of EA, that can happen from third consensus to first individuated as well. Doesn't necessarily have to happen as extreme as it may for him. It may be what's necessary for him due to his own actions and his own karma. Here's the Mars retrograde cycle. Oh, look at this one. Mars is just as active as the Venus retrograde. You can see Mars retrograde September 9th through November 13th, 28 to 15 Aries. Again, the red aspects are the hard ones. The blue aspects are the ease ones. Here, Mars retrograde in Aries makes the trines and sextiles to the Gemini-Sag polarity, while it opposes his Jupiter and it squares Saturn, Venus. And the other thing that happens with the Mars retrograde here is with the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium, it creates a grand cross in forecasting to his natal Cancer, Libra planets. Here's the Sun opposition in the middle of the Mars retrograde cycle. I pulled that up because I thought, oh boy, those two are going to be squaring Saturn, Venus. And then when I pulled it up, I went, oh, and Mercury turned stationary retrograde on the same day in Scorpio, squaring his sun. And we're going to be just a few weeks out from the US presidential election. Note how close the nodal axis is getting to his nodal return. What will happen in the news this time? If we would compare it to the presidential election 4 years ago, this was when the Hollywood tape came out. Somebody released a tape of Donald Trump saying he just grabs them by the capital P, if you remember that. And then that everybody thought he's sunk, he isn't going to win. And then 3 days before the election, the director of the FBI, James Comey, came out and said he's reopening the investigation into Hillary's emails and sunk the boat. So what will we see going on at this time? I always say Mars retrograde is the hardest retrograde cycle. Mars retrograde in its own sign is going to intensify it even more. Mars is about, when Mars is retrograde, it's considered actions. Mars retrograde in Aries is going to intensify the impulsiveness, the impulsive words, the impulsive actions. If there was a time period for us to really, really hold planet Earth in a safe space, it would be during this Mars retrograde. It could get pretty heavy and wild out there. all over the planet, no matter what country you are living in, seeing various explosions of actions going on. Here in the US, it's mass shootings. You pick your country and what's happening. The Mars retrograde in Aries makes first quarter squares 3 times to Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And so that's part of the wanting to break free from the Capricorn control and compressions. Wait and see how well that will go. Here in the US, we'll be waiting to see what the polling will show us. If you guys are willing to hang in there with me, I do have some Democratic candidate charts. Thank you for letting me go. Linda, you can cut me off, but I got just a few more charts left, not too many, but I did.
That's okay, please do.
Okay.
But look, I do have a question from our audience, a very persistent person who, look, basically she is asking, she's saying that you are pushing your own political agenda and have your own political slant. And
yes,
could you,
I do.
Yes. And could you please describe the basis for your forecast, your overall observations and correlations in this particular topic?
I've been saying them more or less all along, okay? The premise of evolutionary astrology is to expose the distortions of thousands of years of patriarchy and help us become aware of what we would consider to be natural law, natural spiritual principles, which are timeless, universal, and always found in nature. Natural spiritual principles are based upon observation, correlation. You don't need a book, you don't need a person, and you don't need the building to tell you what's right or what's wrong. Jeffrey Green used to say, a parent does not have to be told not to put the baby on the Autobahn or highway. You have a natural morality within you to know that you must protect your child. And so, yes, I come from my perspective, and I believe in inclusiveness. Another evolutionary astrology principle is that natural law, and I'm not talking genders here when I say matriarchal principles, they are basically giving, sharing, and including. And if you look back through history and really study it from a factual perspective, you will find that we all lived together communally. We had our individual things, but we all knew we survived better together. You want a very good example of this? Riane Eisler's book, The Chalice and the Blade. So again, from the natural law perspective, it's giving, sharing, and including. As the patriarchal distortions rose up, that became taking, hoarding, and excluding. Taking, hoarding, and excluding. Use an example from the United States perspective, all right? I was saying before we were live on Facebook that I am from the northern plains of the United States. I am from the Black Hills of western South Dakota. I live in Native American country. And so it has been a lot of my conditioning factors. I am quite well aware, maybe not so much in our major metropolitan cities, but we had a massacre of over 200 Native Americans, mostly women and children, back in 1890. It's still pretty fresh for us here in the Black Hills of South Dakota that we were immigrants and we came and slaughtered the native citizens of this country. So from that perspective, we are all a nation of immigrants. for us to now turn around, and if you really want to take it from a broader political level, the US has stuck its nose in a lot of different countries in Central America. We destroyed their political systems in many of those countries, and now people are fleeing for their lives from gangs and the effects of climate change, not being able to raise crops anymore. And now we're saying, nope, this is our country, you can't come here. Taking, hoarding, and excluding. So those are just two simple examples for you of the differences of what's going on. There are many of us who feel at the ending of the Piscean age, the beginning of the Aquarian age, no one has the exact date, but as we are having these transits of the planets in Capricorn, and you can look specifically at Pluto in Capricorn, 3 people in the US own as much wealth as the bottom half, 8 people in the world own as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion. Those are extremes of taking, hoarding, and excluding. And anytime we get to that type of extreme, it sooner or later has to redistribute itself for survival reasons, if nothing else. And so at the ending of this Piscean age with these planets in Capricorn, there are many of us who sense, think, feel, maybe believe that as these planets then move into Aquarius, we will start to see some of these shifts into what we call the Aquarian age. So for me personally, whether you agree with me or not, I see Donald Trump as the epitome of extreme, of patriarchal distortions on this planet. And sooner or later, it will take the masses to stand up and say, this is unsustainable. The climate has been trying to tell us this for how long? Yes, I do have my emotions up. Okay, answer the question?
Kim Marie, thank you so much for that excellent answer. That's fantastic.
All right, okay. Sorry. I got a lot of Scorpio in my chart. I get passionate. Sometimes my my sweetie pie has to go, calm down, honey, just calm down. Channel your Gemini. And so this Mars retrograde, okay, it's going to be pretty hot and heavy the end of this summer and into the early fall. And it will be that way no matter what country you live in. We will see how this turns out specifically to Donald Trump's chart. If we watch over the last 3 years how the polling has barely shifted between those who approve of him and those who disapprove of him, it may not shift in this last year. There may be something that comes along here in the month before the election that does shift things. Time will tell. I don't like the word prediction. I prefer the word forecasting. And typically I like to say, here's what I consider the distortion of something. Here's what I consider the natural expression or evolution of something. I have a south node in the 3rd house, so I do try to look at it both ways. But I have, my rising is 21.5 Capricorn. I have Saturn and Pluto just inside my 1st house. Jupiter going back and forth. And I am just finding that I got to put my voice out there, take it or leave it. So here is the US presidential election chart. Just want to briefly show you this. I, for years, have done the chart, the polls opening in Washington, D.C. at 7 a.m. Washington is where the capital of our country is. The polls open on the East Coast. There's various time frames, but for the most part, a lot of states open polls at 7. They say they close them at 8. They stick around till nobody's left to vote. And so U.S. presidential elections every 4 years always take place with Sun in Scorpio. It generically represents a change in the power structures between Democrats and Republicans, back and forth, back and forth. Scorpio rising with the poles opening could suggest the same. So could the fact that this presidential election will have a fairly tight Uranus in Taurus opposition to the sun in Scorpio. Just that alone will tell us that there could be some upsets that would happen. From the perspective of those who would like to see Donald Trump reelected, those of us who would face the disappointment if he wasn't, it wouldn't be so much an upset. It would be more of the Capricorn control hanging on. The upset would really be if Donald Trump is not reelected. Throughout our most recent history in the United States, if you make it to the presidency, more times than not, you are reelected than you are not reelected. The elder George Bush was an example. Before that, Jimmy Carter was the example before that. Otherwise, there's that tendency to, again, be reelected. So there is that question then of, will the Sun-Uranus opposition create an upset, or will it bring the reelection of Donald Trump? Here are the polls opening in Washington, D.C. at 7 a.m. in the bi-wheel, the outer circle with Donald Trump's chart. He will have a lunar return October 29th. It will be his fourth lunar return. The nodal axial cycle is about 18 and a half years, give or take. And so this will, again, be within days of the election. The first time that I brought this up, I personally got depressed. I literally was going, here's my language, oh, fluff. He's going to be reelected with the nodal axis return. It will take a miracle to defeat him. It will take extreme activism in getting the vote out. And this is looking at his chart without looking at anybody else's chart who is opposing him. Stay tuned. We'll see. He's going to have that Venus over his Neptune. He is going to have Mercury just getting ready to go direct after its retrograde cycle. We'll see what Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn bring about. For me personally, the thought of 4 more years of Donald Trump, it's really, really hard to even think about for me. I want to cry for the planet, to be quite frank. Here's another chart for you. This is the polls closing on Election Day in the United States based upon Washington, D.C. I've always drawn both the polls opening and closing. And for instance, 4 years ago, polls opening, Mars was late Capricorn. Polls closing, Mars was 0 degrees Aquarius just a few minutes in. And when I saw that, I was going, because everybody thought Hillary would win, and I didn't. I spent the last 2-3 months going, I don't think so. So stay tuned. I did see a bumper sticker on somebody's car that said, any functioning adult 2020. So here are the last of my charts. Here's the US. I use the Gemini rising chart. Here's the polls closing on that Gemini rising chart. If you bring that into the picture, it might be a split. it's going to be tight, probably no matter what. But for those of you who are not familiar with the July 4th, 1776 chart, and again, for me, it depends less upon the time. Regardless of the time of day, July 4th, there was a Mercury-Pluto opposition, and this is that polarity, and this is that inclusive-exclusive. And by the way, Cancer can be both inclusive-exclusive, Capricorn can be both inclusive-exclusive. It's not limited to the sign, but that polarity really gets in some of the nationalism and protectionism and power and authority when it wants to get into the fear and the patriarchal distortions that it can bring about. But it is really an epitome of this mercurial mindset that's split within this country. It's reiterated by the Mars square to Neptune and the Sun square to Saturn. So the U.S. history, if you study it, it has a long history of being open to immigrants and closed to immigrants. And we've went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on it throughout various times in our history. We've always not shut ourselves down to that. What am I? I think I'm a third generation immigrant. Here is what I wanted to just show you with the US chart. Pluto is going to make 5 oppositions to the natal Mercury in 2021 before we get to the Pluto-Pluto conjunctions that everybody's talking about. So here's the conversations that we're going to have as a country. Are we going to remain this split? Are we going to find some way to come together if we don't have a leadership on the top wanting to bring both sides together? How can that happen? There are so many comments that, you know, and even like the conversations today in the news with Donald Trump, that he does not speak for the whole country. He is the epitome of that split. You're with me or you're not. And if you're not with me, you know, you're the enemy. So part of this death and rebirth we're going to have with the first Pluto return in this country is all of the various conversations about it. And how will this affect our media? Will we get to the point of being able to talk to one another? There's a book that I've ordered that I haven't read yet. It's called Beyond Contempt: How Both Sides Can Communicate with Each Other Again. The author is Erika Edelson, Etelson. I've not read the book yet, but even me, I'm going, okay, I got to figure out some way to communicate through this divide in the country. Also happening in 2020, Jupiter makes 3 oppositions to the natal US Mercury. Saturn makes 3 conjunctions to the natal US Pluto. So we're already having the Pluto-Pluto return of 22. It's starting right now. And so everything that I've talked about is going to be in the news, going to be happening for all of us personally and collectively right now. It is possible that some of this consensus consciousness, okay, those who cannot think outside the space and time or country they were born in, if you know the phrase is, if religion says astrology is the work of the devil, I take it all in. Consensus. I cannot think outside the space, time, or conditioning factors that I was born into and raised in. That consensus shifting might not start coming along until we get Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. Their conjunction is going to be December 21st on the winter solstice this year at 0.5 degrees Aquarius. And then 21, Jupiter's in Aquarius, Saturn's in Aquarius, 21, 22. Aquarius isn't necessarily going to guarantee the rebellion, but there will be certain degrees of it. And relative to the suppressions we've had with these stellium planets in Capricorn, there could easily be an equal or more intense swing of the pendulum the other direction with Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius. So all the distortions and potential natural expressions of the Cancer Capricorn archetype will be in full exposure through 2020 with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. How extreme will it get before it starts to create change? Will we return to more natural principles? It's not guaranteed. It will depend upon our collective human will and participation. Individually, perhaps the most important work we can do is to show up and be a part of the change we wish to see in the world. I have 4 more slides. This was my last slide. If you're willing to hang in there, here's Joe Biden's chart. I just haven't really thought Joe, I don't think he's strong enough to go up against Donald Trump. I don't think he will excite the young ones enough. He has malarkey on his bus. Who knows what malarkey means? It means no BS if you were paying attention to Donald Trump's words today. You know, he is the candidate of the Democratic National Party. They got involved with the Iowa caucuses today and said they're going to re-caucus. I don't know. I'm of the opinion, Iowa, just have a primary and go out and vote. Stay tuned. He has the loyalty of the Black voters because he was Barack Obama's vice president. I just don't know that he has the charisma or voice to be the candidate. Stay tuned. We're going to be finding out in the next few months. I want to point this out about Bernie Sanders' chart. Bernie Sanders was born with Mars retrograde in Aries. How many of you knew that? Not only that, he has a moon conjunction to Mars retrograde in Aries. And on the election, the bi-wheels are the polls opening 7 a.m. Washington election day. He's going to have Mars make 3 conjunctions to that natal moon and Mars in Aries. Could he be the nominee? It's a possibility. Will he scare the bejeebies out of the more centrist part of the Democratic Party? Yep. You know, we already have a lot of those trying to, you know, push Biden, but there are also a lot of the liberal elite with money that aren't giving Biden any money anymore. They're going to wait and see who shows up. He's going to have that transiting North Node on his Jupiter. Mercury on his Venus. There could, you know, be some possibilities there for Bernie. I didn't put in Elizabeth Warren's chart. I personally like Elizabeth Warren. She would be my favorite. I don't see her getting the nomination. Part of it is the whole gender issue yet that we've not gotten over in this country. Mercury, Pluto opposition. Oh, gender thing there. Pete Buttigieg. Nobody knows an exact time for Pete. So here's his chart for noon. And when I don't know a time, I use 0 Aries rising and just the natural houses. I'd not really looked at his chart. And for those of you who know Patricia Walsh, her and I were on the phone together this week one evening, just catching up. And so we got our computers out and, you know, Buttigieg was, you know, coming out with these early Iowa results from their caucus, you know, barely ahead of Bernie Sanders. And I went, you know, I really haven't looked at his chart too much. And we pulled it up and we saw that Sun South Node conjunction. And it was like, oh, Oh, stellium's going to be on that. Interesting. And so here's the poles opening on his chart. You see Mercury right on his Pluto. You see Venus moving into Libra there. You see that south node on his Neptune. Now, there are various theories for his chart. There was an unknown astrologer who said that they asked him directly at a book signing, and he said 7:11 a.m. No one has any idea if that's accurate. In the book that Mayor Pete released, I don't know the name of the book, but you put a book out if you're running for president. He put out that he was born in the evening. So here's the time frame that Pat and I were playing around with. You know, if we put it in the evening, it's going to be somewhere between a first and fourth house Pluto. And didn't quite see him, and I, again, could be totally wrong here, guessing game. Didn't really see him with Pluto in the second, Pluto in the fourth. We were both saying Pluto in the first or the third. And we were thinking, oh, military. He was a naval intelligence officer. He's known for being extremely intelligent, almost photographic memory. And we thought, could he be a Libra rising? Could he be a first house Pluto? It would put on the day of his birth, the moon shifts from late Scorpio to early Sag. I kind of sense a moon in Sag for him. And, you know, his ability to just speak so philosophically, it's, you know, a lot like Barack Obama could do. And so this is kind of what I'm playing with right now for Mayor Pete's chart. And I have to say, I'm giving him a second look and a third look and going, he may be centrist enough for the moderates and the moderate part of the Democratic Party. He may be progressive enough for the young ones. Can he call over the black vote? Time will tell. I will not discount that South Node conjunct the Sun in Capricorn. Going back here to it on the generic level, and again, this is election day, that's pretty powerful. He may have a voice. And in this case, you're not necessarily looking at that late Capricorn as being the epitome of the patriarchal distortions. You know, the US declared independence and went to war with Pluto in late Capricorn. The rebellions can come in late Capricorn. So I've not looked at a composite chart between Donald Trump and Mayor Pete. Stay tuned. You know, it might be early in the game for us to guesstimate who, but I'll be watching this guy. I want to call him a kid. All right, these are my last charts. I went overboard. So thank you, Linda, for inviting me on early. Thank you for anyone who stayed along, and I'm willing to answer questions if somebody has more questions.
Yes, we do have one question. If you could please go back to the bi-wheel, the 7 a.m. election date chart with Trump's natal chart.
Here we go.
That one, yes. And a question from Fab. He's asking, is that a quincunx between Trump's natal Mars in the 12th and the transiting Mars in the 8th? And he's asking, does that mean some irksome karmic Mars energy coming down?
You know, I will say, I think what you mean is it a Susky squadrate? Because if you, for instance, compare Mars to his natal Pluto, Aries to Leo, you know, that's the waning trine. and it's moving into orb. It would have to be closer to the 15 degrees mark. No, it'd have to be 15 degrees of Virgo to be an inconjunct. What you will find happen after a trine, let's just say this generically, although this is going to be the opposite. Okay, hold on, wait a minute. I got a slide right here for myself that I keep this handy to do my math for you really quickly. So I got to look at this and see. I'm going to pull something off here so that I can see it better. What we have happening before we get to the waning trine, it's coming off of a waning sesquisquadrate, moving towards a waning trine. And that transiting Mars in Aries going to the natal Mars, when it's coming off of the waning sesquisquadrate, that means it's went from full phase to disseminating phase. And so it is asking, in general, disseminating phase asks us, it's yin phase, it asks us to take in the public. It asks us to learn all we can from the outer world so we can function in it. And if we start that at disseminating phase, then when we get to the disseminating trine of 240 degrees, it blossoms for us. We are noticed in society. So I don't know if I'm understanding your question exactly right. If there's more to it, by all means, speak up.
I think that's it, Kim Marie. And does anybody here in our Zoom audience have a question? If so, you can unmute and ask. Okay, that looks like it's it, Kim Marie. Well, thank you so much for a very thorough meeting as usual. And for going through all of those charts and details.
Yeah, you know, when you invite me, she comes with slides.
Virgo generation. So thank you so much. There are many people interested in knowing all of this. So thank you very much from all of us, and we look forward to catching you next time.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for letting me show up and speak with you, and all the best to everyone in 2020.
Just unmuting everyone now. Would you all please thank Kim Marie Weimer, everyone?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye for now, Kim Marie. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kim.
All right.